If you enjoy this show, please share, rate, and review. The more listeners, the greater the impact. Lauren Burns shares her powerful testimony of being kidnapped at age 7 and wants to provide inspiration to others. She was kidnapped by her Jordanian father and taken to his native country of Jordan. Her mother, Kathy Hopkins, hired ex-military experts who traveled there to bring her home safely. As documented in the movie Desperate Rescue, Lauren and her mother escaped across a secured military border into Israel, bringing her back to the United States. We're excited to hear Lauren's story and about all of the things that she's doing.
Here I am. Look at me, I'm alright. In the storm, dancing to the rhythm of the rain.
Welcome home, where healing and restoration are celebrated in stories from those who have walked through fire and come out the other side. Welcome to the Pursuing Redemption podcast with Heather Shore.
Dancing to the rhythm of the rain. Here I am. Look at me, I'm alright. In the storm, dancing to the
Well, Lauren, thank you so much for coming on the Pursuing Redemption podcast. We're excited to have you today.
Thank you for having me, Heather. I'm excited to be here.
We would love to hear about your journey with Jesus and you coming to know him as your Lord and Savior.
I've known Jesus my whole life. I grew up with my mom taking me to church and telling me about God. But my father was Muslim, or he is Muslim, and he is from Jordan. And so I had that going on in my life as well. And so you can learn about Jesus and you can know about God and you can go to church, but then when you really go through some crazy hard things in life, you really encounter who God is and who to run to. And so that happened in my life at a young age.
So then tell us a little bit about this incredible journey that we've heard about. Not many people have a movie made about their lives, so that's pretty wonderful. So we would love to hear about Desperate Rescue.
Sure. So like I said, my parents, they met in the Dallas area. My mom was from Florida and she moved to Dallas to go to school. And then my father is from a small town in Jordan. Jordan is near Israel. And he's from a town by the name of Jerash. And he had come to the Dallas area to go to school. And that's how they met. And they dated they were married for 4 years prior to having me. And life was, good, normal. My dad was not really practicing his beliefs at the time. And when he found out that my mom was pregnant, he told my mom that he needed to go to Jordan to take care of his father. And my mom didn't think anything of it. She was like, sure, no problem, go take care of him. But the weeks started turning into months that he was gone. And so she found herself in her early 20s, alone, pregnant, scared, not knowing if he was going to come back. And so 3 months later is when he came back and he looked different. My mom, of course, was emotional and upset and was like, where have you been? And he began to tell her that he went to Jordan to make a home for us. He found a job. And she was like, we never discussed moving to Jordan. This was all brand new news to her. And that's when things changed in their marriage. So by the time I was 6 weeks old, they had filed for divorce.
Wow, because it had led to that much dissension within the marriage.
Yes, he was pretty adamant. And from what I think and can understand is it's like he had this duty and this responsibility all of a sudden to instill his beliefs and his traditions into my life, since he was going to be a first-time father. And my mom they never went into their marriage having that discussion. And so she found herself with a newborn baby with all of those hormones and emotions, and now single. So she, and one thing that I've learned, Heather, is God, he knows what's going to happen in our life before we know it. And he starts like paving a way. And he was already putting the right people in my mom's life because, again, she's from Florida. She didn't have family with her. And so at this time, she was working with a woman by the name of Wanda, and she had introduced my mom to her daughter, Beverly, and that happens to be Beverly Lambert. If you listen to country music, you know the name Miranda Lambert. She's the
Oh,
singer,
yeah.
songwriter. Yeah. So before me and Miranda were even a thought, her parents were best friends with my mom.
How cool is that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Look
So
at
they're a
God
big part of
working.
my,
That's awesome.
yeah, they're a big part of my journey. So when this happened, Beverly and Rick, they were shocked too, because they knew my dad and they were like, this is so unlike him. But my mom began that journey of being a single mom, and she lived with a woman by the name of Joyce, and I called her my Aunt Joyce. She was older. She couldn't have kids. And so she was like, Kathy, why don't you and your baby, y'all live with me, and I'll help you get on your feet. And so that was my life, Heather, for 7 years. I went back and forth between my mom's house and my dad's house, that typical
Okay.
divorced kid.
Sure.
My dad had remarried to a woman. Her family's from the Middle East, but she was raised in the United States. And they started their own family. So now I had little siblings, and that was fun. I got to go hang out with my siblings and be the big sister. I had a fantastic relationship with my dad. He was very loving and he was very involved. He had a restaurant in the Dallas area, so I'd go hang out with him at his restaurant on the weekends. And my parents had a good relationship with everything that had happened. They just made it work. But everything changed in my life when I turned 7. So this happened in 1987. My dad had asked my mom if I could stay an extra night with him to go trick-or-treating with my siblings. She didn't think anything of it. She's like, sure, of course. Just make sure you get Lauren to school on Monday, because I had just started going to a new school. So, there's certain things I remember very vividly. And Heather, when I started, I'm in the process of writing a book, and I have my own podcast where I share my story. And when I started this journey of writing, I found this book of a box of pictures and cassette tapes and magazine articles, all the things to help me share my story. And there was a photo of me in my Halloween costume. It was a yellow and blue cheerleading outfit. My mom put my hair in my pigtails, bright red lipstick. And my dad came to pick me up from the house that day. And I had my pink suitcase, the little ones that say like going to grandma's on the outside.
Yeah.
And he picks me up, and I get in the car, and I'm like, where's my siblings? Where's my stepmom? Because nobody was there except for me and my dad. And I thought that was weird. And so he looked back at me and he said, I have a surprise for you. And I said, yeah, we're going trick-or-treating. He said, well, actually, no, I'm going to take you on a big trip so you can meet your family. Well, I was totally confused. So I was like, what do you mean? He goes, well, we're going to the airport. I'm taking you to Jordan so you can meet your family for the first time. Well, I start asking all the questions, 7-year-old, right? I'm like, well, my mom never told me about going on a plane. She never told me about leaving and going to Jordan. Does she know? Is she okay with this? And he's like, yes, Lauren, it's a surprise. We didn't want you to know. And I just continue asking questions because nothing's making sense to me at this point as he's, driving to the airport. And so as that's going on my end, while we're traveling to the airport, my mom that Monday, she, and nothing happens by mistake. People can say all kinds of things, but I believe in the Holy Spirit and I know God speaks. That Monday, my mom took off to go have lunch with me at school. And, even being a mom that's married, it's really hard to stop your work day to go have lunch with your kids in the middle of the day.
It is. Yeah, it is.
And so for like a single mom, for her to happen to do that on that Monday, I know that was totally a God thing. She got to the school. She goes into the courtyard and she's watching as all the kids line up to walk to the cafeteria. And she's scanning for me and she doesn't see me anywhere. And so then the teacher locks eyes with my mom and walks over, and my mom's like, where's Lauren? And the teacher tells her, well, Kathy, she never came to school today. And my mom said, what do you mean? And the teacher said, well, your ex-husband, her dad never brought her. Well, the last thing she said to him was, make sure Lauren gets to school Monday. So she's mad. She's frustrated. So back then in the 80s, there's no cell phone. So she goes to the closest payphone. And the first phone call she makes is to his house. And the phone rings and rings and rings and nobody answers. So then she called his restaurant. And they told her Ollie never came to work today. Well, that's when she knew something was wrong. That anger became a little bit more panic. And it's like God was just telling her right there at that payphone, call the airlines. My mom had gone to Jordan. This would have been 9 years prior to this happening. So before they got married, she had gone to meet his family and to see where he grew up. And she remembered that the main airlines that goes into Amman, Jordan is the Alia, the Royal Alia Airlines, and their headquarters is out of New York. So standing at that payphone, her third phone call is to that airlines. And the lady answers, and my mom said, do you have a Lauren and Ollie on your flight reservations for going to Jordan? And the lady said, ma'am, we can't give out that kind of information. Well, then my mom's voice changed a little bit, and she said, please, I think my ex-husband's taken my daughter. Can you please help me? So the lady put her on hold, and she came back on the line, and she said, yes, ma'am, I have Lauren and Ollie arriving in Amman, Jordan this evening. So that was the moment that she knew my dad had taken me.
Wow. And so I can only imagine as a mother, like the kind of panic, you have to be having. Maybe take us through those next steps of what she did.
So that fourth phone call, Rick was a police officer in Dallas at that time, but he had stopped working as a police officer and opened a private investigation company with his wife, Beverly, called Lambert and Lambert.
These are the Lamberts, right?
These are Miranda Lamberts. Yeah, she actually just released a new album, and she talks about some of her songwriting comes from the things that her parents went through when, in all their years of private investigations and things like that. So that's why her songs are so good. But
yeah, they're fantastic songs. Yeah,
it's real life. But so my mom called. She paged Rick 911, standing from that payphone, and Beverly tells her story whenever I interviewed her, and she said, Rick and I never work together very often because they would always split and conquer the world, right? But this day they were working at the Dallas County Courthouse together when he got that page. So he got the page and he looked at Beverly and said, something's wrong. Kathy's paging me 911. So they asked the clerk to use the phone. And they're both standing there together, and my mom begins to tell Rick that my dad had taken me to Jordan. And so they said, Kathy, go to your townhouse. We are on our way. So they left, jumped in their car. They drove down the Dallas Expressway going 90, 100 miles down the road. And they met at my mom's townhouse. And the first thing Rick told my mom to do is go to Radio Shack, get a recording device, and put it on your phone. So every time you try to call Jordan, or if you talk to the police, we can go back and listen to the tapes, because your emotions are going to be all over the place. And we need to be able to listen for any kind of hints. And, Heather, because of that, I have all these cassette tapes still, and they all work, and I'm able to go back and listen, which is hard to do. But my mom began calling every day, sitting in that townhouse, to all the phone numbers she had of his family members, begging to talk to me.
Really?
And she would call. And when you listen to some of the interviews that I do, I share those cassette tapes. But she's begging, please, Lauren's my daughter. I'm her mother. Let me talk to her. Let me talk to Ollie. This isn't right. You have to bring her home. I'm not going to press charges. Just tell him to come home. And they just keep saying, no English. We don't speak English. Please speak Arabic. They're not here. Ollie, no Lauren. It was day after day after day of these kinds of emotional phone calls. And then Rick and Beverly are calling everyone they know, calling the police, calling all their contacts, trying to climb up, like reaching out to Ross Perot, whoever they could to get help. And every answer was, this is out of the United States jurisdiction. We can't help you. It's, that's his daughter. He's Jordanian. If you try to go over there to get her, it was just one answer after the other. We can't help you.
How long did this go on for? Because in my mind, I mean, now we have foreign consulates, right? Where you could reach out to the foreign consulate in Jordan and try and get some interaction.
Well, still to this day, I don't think we have a treaty with Jordan. So different countries, if you don't have that agreement, that's the problem. So this went on for days and weeks, and my mom wasn't really eating. She's not sleeping. You can imagine.
Sure.
I mean, I have little boys, like I say little, they're growing up, but I cannot imagine like the emotions. So Beverly and Rick, when all of this first happened, they moved out of their house and with Miranda, I think Miranda was like 3 or 4 years old at the time. They lived with my mom day and night, answering the phones, helping her. They didn't leave her side. But there was one day, and I really truly believe that it was totally God so that I can share my story today. Beverly called my mom, and I have this on the cassette tape. She calls my mom, and my mom's just having a horrible day, and she breaks down crying. And my mom's like, please, Beverly, pray for Lauren's safety. Pray that wherever she is in the streets of Jordan, if she's in Lebanon, if she's in the mosque, wherever she is, that God would protect her. And so Beverly starts praying over me while we're on the phone. And then Beverly said, Kathy, you have got to get away from all of the noise, all of the chaos, all of the emotions. You need to get away and be with Jesus, and you need to pray. And my mom's just crying, and she's like, yes, you're right. I've got to pray. I've got to get away. I've got to hear from God. And then Beverly tells my mom that she had read a book that fasting brings you the closest to God. And my mom said, yes, I've got to get away and pray and fast. And then my mom goes, and I've got to get rid of these cigarettes. And Beverly's like, well, we're going to pray over that too, because
that's awesome.
I mean, my mom had smoked cigarettes, I think, since she was like 18 or 19. But she told me recently at this point, she was smoking 2 cigarettes at a time, like all day long.
Stress smoking. Yeah.
So my mom agreed with Bev, but Rick had made an appointment for her. He pulled some connections and made an appointment to go see the grand jury in Dallas. The point of that meeting was really to just get a warrant out for my dad's arrest. So if he happened to come back to the United States, my stepmom and her kids were still in the United States, and she was refusing to go to Jordan as long as he had me, because he pretty much told her, I'm not Lauren's mom. I'm not going to be her mom because she has a mother. You need to bring her back.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But he was not listening. He just figured she would give in eventually. So Rick reminded my mom as they drove to the courthouse that day, Kathy, they're probably not going to be able to help you, but this is just a process we have to go through. Because the State Department had already mailed her this big envelope full of what do you do if your child's been abducted, support groups, all kinds of literature to read through. And she called the support groups, and person after person that she talked to was like, yes, my child's been gone for 2 years. My child's been gone for 4 years. I'm still trying. So you can imagine what that felt like, you know.
That's completely hopeless at that point.
Yes, completely hopeless. Yes. So that's what she was walking into that courtroom, completely hopeless. So she stood before the grand jury, and she tells her story that she had full custody of me, that they were divorced, but my dad had taken me to Jordan. And the grand jury, after says, I'm so sorry, ma'am, but we can't help you. We don't have a treaty with Jordan. There's nothing that we can do. And at that point, my mom just broke down and said, can I be real with you? It's not fair that we spend billions of dollars in foreign aid, and you're telling me you can't even help me get my child back. this isn't fair, as she's crying and, tears coming down her face. And she said every single person on that grand jury was shaking their head saying, you're right. It's not fair. And one man stood up, and his name is Al Zapanta, and he's has a lot of different awards from the military. He's still works in the political realm even today and into his 80s. But he opened up his wallet, and he said, if you're not happy with the State Department, here's my card. Give me a call, and I'll see what I can do. My mom took his card, and Heather, when you feel that defeated, you can't even see the light in front of you. You can't even see the hope. And so she thanked him and walked out and got in the car and went back to the townhouse. And Beverly was like, how did it go? And my mom was like, it was fine. I met this guy, but, she just wasn't hopeful. And she grabbed her Bible, she grabbed her bag, and she said, I'm going away. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know how long I'll be gone, but I just need to get away. And Beverly said, we've got this. We'll answer the phones. Don't worry about things here. You just go. So she got in her car and she drove towards Fort Worth, and she found a motel room, and she checked herself in. And she was there for 3 days and 3 nights, and she fasted and prayed, only drinking water. And on that 3rd day, she heard God give her a Bible verse, and I have it written down. It's Daniel 10:12. Do not be afraid, Daniel. Since the first day you set your mind to gain understanding and humble yourself before God, your words were heard. God was saying, Kathy, I see you, because you've left the chaos. You've left all the stuff, and you've come before me in this motel room. I see you, and I'm going to answer your prayers. And then God began showing her, and I always use the word wrestling, it's like God's wrestling with her.
Yeah.
And God told her, you need to lay down those cigarettes. And instead of running to God, she was running to cigarettes. And, he's a jealous God. So he's like, lay down those cigarettes and you run to me. And you need to deal with the areas of bitterness and unforgiveness in your heart, because we know that the prayers of the righteous, those prayers are heard. And so my mom had to, reveal those areas in her life and lay them down at the cross. And Heather, she left there and she went back to the townhouse. And when Beverly opened the door, she looked at my mom and she said, Kathy, you're not the same. You don't look the same. And my mom said, I'm not, because God heard my prayers and I'm getting my baby back. After that, Heather, everything changed in my story. My mom remembered that business card and she called Al. Al began to tell my mom that 1 week prior to her going to that courtroom, he was in Washington, D.C. having lunch with his friend by the name of Everett Alvarez. Everett Alvarez is one of the first POWs. He was held captive for 8.5 years. And he's very well known in the military. A lot of people learn about him. Everett was telling Al about a group of men by the name of CTU. Their organization was in North Carolina. They had been working for about 2 years, going into the Middle East and rescuing like executives and different people that had been captured. They also did a lot of security for movie productions. They did a lot of contract work, but their specialty was the Middle East. I mean, this is 1 week before meeting my mom and hearing my story. And so as Al's
God
telling
lining
my
up
mom,
the dominoes, Yeah.
Yes.
That's so
God
wild.
yes. Like no one can tell me that this is a coincidence. Like God's hand in it. So, so Al is telling my mom, Kathy, they've never rescued a child before. And my mom's like, I don't care. I want to meet these guys. And Al's like, it's going to cost a lot of money. And my mom said, I don't care. We're going to figure it out. And then Al said, they are not in the military. If something goes wrong, the military cannot get involved. You're putting your life at risk. Again, she said, I want to pay for them to fly them to Dallas. I want to meet them. So Everett actually went to CTU himself in person, and he met with Don Feeney. And before Everett could even ask Don, will you go meet with this woman? Don's like, I will do whatever you want me to do, sir, because I know who you are and I trust you. So my mom flew Don and Dave to Dallas to meet with them. And she showed up. It was at a hotel in their conference room. And she had already prepared all these big binders of descriptions of my dad, all his family members, pictures of the town, maps of the city, descriptions of every kind, all of our photos. So when she walked in, she was prepared. And after sitting and talking with her, they said, yes, we will take on this mission. So my mom had to come up with the money, and that was a whole nother story. And then she went with Al to Washington, D.C. because they had to get passports for me. How do you get a passport for a kid when you don't have the kid? So, yeah. So they were in Washington. It was supposed to be a couple days. It turned into a week and a half of trying to meet with the right people that could help them, to get them border passes, entry stamps, visas, passports. And that was very stressful. My mom said that was one of the hardest parts of the whole mission. Dave Chatelier, he is the oldest of the group of men that went. His expertise is intelligence. He went into Jordan 3 weeks before anyone else, and his job was to try to figure out an escape route to get me out once they found me.
Okay, that makes sense.
Because you can't just fly me out of there.
Yeah.
And then he was also trying to find me and find my dad's house, but he couldn't. He went through different areas and figured out, okay, no, we can't go through Petra. We can't go through Aqaba because it's too dangerous. The safest route out of Jerash would be the Allenby Bridge, which is a very secure border between Israel and Jordan. Back then, you would have to take a bus over. I think now you can just drive through, but he couldn't find me. So Don and Dave came into Jordan, and they're searching the streets for me. They're, all dressed in disguise. They're getting different rental cars every day, so no one could track what car they're in. They're trying not to be seen together. They're going through the ruins. They're checking out the marketplaces. They can't find me anywhere. And so JD was like, I'm going to have to pray. And so JD's praying that morning, God, help me find her. And JD and Dawn were together on this particular day, standing a couple feet away from one another on the street. And a school bus pulls up. And I have darker hair, dark olive complected skin, but I have bright blue eyes. That's like that distinguishing feature that pops out. So the school bus pulls up, and Dave looks through the window, and there I am. I'm sitting on that bus, and I turn and I look at him, and we lock eyes. And he just stares at me, and he gets like excited, and he runs over to Dawn and grabs him by the shoulders and starts shaking Dawn. And he's like, I saw Lauren. And he's like, what do you mean? How do you know it's Lauren? And he goes, I saw her eyes. She's on that bus, as my bus is like driving by. So they try to get in the car to follow the bus, but JD was saying the streets were so crowded with people, they couldn't get through, and so they lost the bus. But Heather, that was the first time they really knew I was there, because
and alive,
because there were talks that maybe I was in Lebanon or possibly somewhere else.
Sure.
So at that point, they contacted Dave, and they said, okay, we have seen Lauren. And Dave said, we've got to bring Kathy into Jordan because we can't find the house. We need her help. At this point, my mom was in Cyprus with another one of the men. His name is Jim. Jim stayed behind to make sure my mom was safe and to take care of all their luggage and the cash and everything else they needed. So they contacted my mom and said, we need you to come in because we can't find the home. So my mom flew into Amman, and she was full of excitement. This was the closest she had been to me. I was gone for 3 months. This was the closest she had been to me in 3 months. She knew she was getting closer. And so they have her dressed in disguise, and she's sitting in the front seat, and Dawn's driving, JD's in the back. And as they drive into Jerash, her heart just sort of sinks in her chest. And she's like, nothing looks familiar. Like, this town looks different. The dirt roads are paved. The little buildings are now really big buildings. And so the guys are like, wait a minute, you don't recognize anything? And she's like, no. So they start zigzagging the streets thinking something will trigger her memory. And she got down on the floorboard of that car and put her head in her hands, and she just starts praying out loud, God, you have not brought me and these men this far to not even find the home. You have to help me. And it's like the Holy Spirit just started reminding her of how she had walked those streets 9 years before. She was telling me after dinner every evening, she would go out with my aunts and they would walk arm in arm through the streets to the different areas. And she began remembering the different dips in the road and the hills, and the Holy Spirit was just showing her. And so without ever opening her eyes, she would say, turn left, go straight, turn right. And, Dawn's like, okay, just keep driving. And she looks out the window and she sees my dad's car that he had shipped over from the United States with Texas license plates sitting on the street. And she sort of froze. And then finally she goes, I saw his car. So Dawn said, okay, hide your face, Kathy. And about that time, Dawn looked up and he saw my dad walk out of the building. That was the moment that they found my dad's home. But again, nothing happened until my mom was in that floor praying. It's just, God is so good. God's like, I'm getting credit for this.
And just shows you that, for each step we take, we really need to be praying.
Every single step. And it doesn't matter how hopeless you feel. It doesn't matter the situation, because God knows. But he's just like, keep your eyes on me, not on your situation. Look up at me. So they found me. They found the house. Now they had to figure out the mission. How are they going to get me? The house was in a very busy area, and there was a police station right down the street. So they're like, okay, we are not going to take her from the house. My mom's like, no guns. Try not to use guns, I mean, of course, that's what mom is going to say. So there was one, and I told my mom this after the fact. There was one stop on the bus route. The house was like a little farmhouse on the outskirts of town. Those kids had just started going to school with me a couple weeks prior to this happening. They decided that would be the best place to hijack the bus and get me off. And so the day of the mission, they had to have a code word because they were very careful what they said over the phone lines. They were talking to people in the United States. They were talking to Jim in Cyprus. And so Dawn's wife, her name is Judy. She's also a part of CTU, a part of the company. And she was helping us from stateside in North Carolina. And she told her husband, she said, tell Kathy the code word to know everything is a go. The mission is a go. The sun is shining. But tell her it's not S-U-N. It's S-O-N. The sun is shining. And my mom said, yes, absolutely. The sun is shining. So the day of the mission, one of the men, we had two rental cars. One of the guys had, his job was to watch the house to make sure that I actually got on the bus because they don't want to hijack the school bus and me not be on it. So he saw that I got on the bus and he radioed, the sun is shining. And as soon as we heard the guys, and as soon as Dawn heard that, they watched the bus. And as the bus passed them in the other car, it was Dawn and my mom and JD. They went behind the bus and they blocked it in when the bus stopped at that farmhouse. Dawn got out and he went to the driver's side door to the bus driver and was speaking in English to try to get to distract him. JD got out and went to the driver's passenger side, like those accordion style doors. And he was trying to tap on the window for them to open the door and they wouldn't. And so he sort of pushed his way onto the bus. My mom, and they're all, her hair is covered. she goes over and she spots me through the window. And there's lots of things I don't vividly remember, but I'll never forget the first moment I saw my mom. She went over and she knocked on the window and she's motioning to me. And I just turned and looked at her, and all I could think of, Heather, was that looks just like my mom, but how can it be? My mom's in Texas. Like, that can't be her. I think I'm dreaming. Because I think at that point I just sort of thought I wasn't going to see her again. Because at this point I was going into school. I knew it wasn't a vacation when I was going to school. So JD got on the bus and he got the keys out of the ignition and he threw them into some bushes, hoping that would distract the bus driver so they wouldn't just immediately go straight to the police. And so that worked, because that's what they did. And then my mom pushed past JD and she got to me and she scooped me up, picked me up, grabbed my backpack. And as she's bringing me off of that bus, there's a lady chaperone. The lady chaperone jumps on my mom's back. My mom has to let go of my hand, and she turns around and she punches the lady in the nose. And so now there's like blood coming down this lady's face. So now I'm really freaking out. Like, the only one that threw a punch was my mom out of these big military guys.
Big mama bear, like, she's protecting her daughter.
That's right. So Dawn and JD see what's going on, and they come over and they get me into the car. They cover me in the floorboard with a blanket, and we speed off. And then a couple blocks down the road, we switched cars with Dave. Dave actually had one of the most dangerous missions. He took the car that we hijacked the bus with, and he drove back towards the city to be our decoy so that we could go on towards Israel. And so the decoy worked. Dave got pulled over and on the side of the road, and he's got military police surrounding him. They pull him out of the car. They are going through every inch of his car. They're going through his trunk, looking for us, looking for any identification of us. And he had nothing in that car but a little satchel and a Pepsi can and a Snickers bar. And he's just speaking English, acting like a tourist, like, hey, where can I go fishing? Where's the best ruins to see around here? And that day, my mom had made reservations for us to fly out of Amman back to the United States, hoping they would look for us at the airport. Well, while Dave is being interrogated on the side of the road, they bring the bus driver to him. And the bus driver's speaking Arabic, and he's pointing to the car, and he's like, yes, that's the car that hijacked me. But I don't know who that guy is, because remember, Dave was not there at the hijacking. So then this is like 30, 40 minutes goes by, and Dave can hear on the radios, the walkie-talkies, Alia Airport, Alia Airport. All of a sudden, Heather, all of those soldiers, they leave Dave on the side of the road. They all go to the airport looking for me. They were shutting down the whole airport looking for me. And Dave was able to get free. And that's a whole nother story that you have to hear him tell. But while that's happening, we are on our way to Israel. On this day, it's so foggy. The fog is so thick, you can barely see the front of the car, the hood of the car. And so as we're driving, there's a village that's like a refugee camps between Israel and Jordan, where people are living in tents. And so we're changing out of our clothes. They're changing me out of my uniform and getting me into other clothes. So we slow down and roll down the window, and we're handing our clothes out to the people living in the tents. And we continue to drive, and my mom is just praying the whole time, because we know at any minute we could get pulled over and that would be it. And in the distance, my mom asked, what is that bright light? Because through all the fog, all she could see was this bright light in the distance. And Dawn said, well, Kathy, that's Israel. The sun is shining over Israel. My mom just began to cry and pray. It's like, again, God was like, Kathy, I see you. I haven't left you. I'm going to get you through this. Just keep going towards that light. So we get to the border. And like I said, back then, you had to leave your car on the Jordanian side. You couldn't drive over into Israel.
Okay.
So we all get out. We have those papers in our hands that she worked so hard to get in Washington with the entry stamps and all the things. And we had to hand over all that paper. And then we had to get onto a bus. And if you can imagine, it's tall fences, barbed wire, big, tall towers with military machine guns.
I was there last year. Yeah.
Okay.
I know what you're
So
talking
you know
about.
what I'm talking about. So Dawn and Dave had been traveling through the borders daily. So they knew every inch of it, but still their brains are thinking, what are we going to do if this goes down? And they're on high alert. And so we're sitting on the bus and we're waiting, I think like 30, 40 minutes. And Dawn gets frustrated. It's like, where's the bus driver? I've got a meeting I'm going to be late for in Israel. We got to go. So finally the bus driver gets on, and the way it used to be, there was a shack in the middle of the bridge where when you get to the middle, an Israeli soldier and bus driver, they switch and they take you on over into Israel. So we're driving. We stop the bus. They switch. About that time, there's a big commotion behind us. All these cars are starting to come up to where we just left. They just realized after shutting down that airport that I wasn't there, but that I was actually on that bus. But by this point, it was too late. We had already driven over into Israel, so there's nothing they could do. They couldn't stop us. We get off that bus, and all you see is the Israeli flag is flying. And my mom's like, it's like in the movies where you want to get down and touch, kiss the ground. We get off the bus, and my mom just starts crying. Like all those emotions just start coming down. My mom's hugging me, and I'm crying. And there's a group of women, and they see the commotion, and they go over to JD, and they're like, excuse me, what's going on? Is that little girl okay? Is the mom okay? And JD looks at her, and he's like this big military handsome guy, and he goes, you see that mom and that daughter? We just rescued them. And he begins to tell them the story, and they begin jumping up and down saying, hallelujah, praise you, Jesus. We've come to the Holy Land. We've seen a miracle. And they come over and they start praying with us. So, even then, it's like God was like, I've got your people here to celebrate with you on the other end.
This is a mind-blowing testimony.
Yeah.
How, I guess you guys get into Israel and then you come back to Texas.
Mm-hmm.
I can only imagine like how you guys had to re-enter regular life. You know what I mean? Like that's just a huge trauma you walked through.
Yes.
For both of you, even though the outcome was amazing and what everyone would pray for. How did you guys re-enter regular life?
Good question. And that's why I'm writing this book. It's really, yes, it's to tell the miracle of what happened, but it's also to talk through the journey of the healing. Because I always say my journey really began after I got home, But when we came back, when we came back into Dallas, the first person I saw when I came off that plane was Miranda. She was blonde hair, running against all the people, running the wrong direction up the tarmac to give me a big hug. And I'll never forget that, because that was my best friend there to greet me. And Beverly and Rick were there, and my Aunt Joyce, and Joyce had a beautiful home, and she had Christmas trees in every room. She kept every Christmas tree up until I came home. And so we celebrated Christmas that day when I got back. But yes,
a miracle happened.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. And I've gone through and found all those photos recently. And, it's a healing journey when you go back and look at your past trauma, but you can see the fingerprint of God and see what he's brought you through. But I had to change my last name. We lived in hiding. I moved about 14 times by the time I got to high school. My mom spent $80,000 to get me back. And so she paid her rent with jewelry, and she had nothing left when we got back. So we moved to Florida and lived with my grandmother for a couple years until we could get back on our feet. yeah, and we had to live in hiding, and the fear of would my dad try to come get me back, and that was hard.
So can I ask, with your stepmom and your step siblings, how did all that work? So your dad stayed in Jordan and then she was still here in Texas, right?
Yes, and I don't know the details. I know eventually they did go to Jordan. I don't know for how long. And then he eventually came back here because she didn't really want to be in Jordan. And he did come back to the United States and lived here for 20 something years and raised his family.
Oh, wow. So how was
Hmm.
that process then? Did you ever speak to him again? Was there any forgiveness? I mean, that's obviously a part of this whole healing
Sure
journey.
is. Yep. And that's why I'm wanting to write a book is, you know, I say you don't have to be kidnapped or have a child kidnapped to know hurt and unforgiveness and angerness and bitter and loss. There's a lot, life is hard, but God, He redeems, He restores, He heals if you let Him. Um, my mom was a beautiful example of forgiveness. She never talked bad about my dad ever. She wanted to encourage me to have a relationship with him. So when I was able to, in those early years, my dad would write letters to my grandmother's house and mail them, and I would write, and we would post it through my grandmother, so he never knew where I lived. And so I would try to write letters, and Heather, that was hard. I mean, opening those letters was hard. Seeing pictures of my family that I couldn't see brought a lot of emotion. So we did that for a couple years. Um, in my high school years, when I got older, I was able to actually see my dad for the first time. I really wanted to know who he was. I wanted to see my siblings. So I saw him at the Galleria Mall in Dallas. We went to a public area
Makes sense. Yeah.
and saw him for the first time. It was hard, but it was good. And then in my high school years, he actually came to my high school graduation. I
Oh,
moved to Lindale, Texas. That's where Miranda's from. I lived with her parents for about a year while my parents were getting their house built. And she sings a song called The House That Built Me. And I lived in that house.
really?
Yeah. I lived in that house. And people ask me, did you go through a lot of counseling? And for me, living in the house that built me before it had a song, um, and going to church and being in what we call life group, where you're just with a small group of people and you're praying and you're reading the Bible, and it's a intimate setting, so you can be open and go through those hard father wounds. I had a lot of
Sure.
father wounds,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and Heather, for years I thought, how can God be a good father if this is the kind of father I had? So God had to wrestle with me through all of that. But in that house, in those life groups, that's where my healing began. But my dad actually went to my high school graduation, and my mom invited him and his family to come to our house after, and she cooked dinner for them. Because that's forgiveness. Now, not everybody can do that. I mean, we have to have
No, but
boundaries.
still, that is amazing. That's an amazing story of redemption.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Wow.
Because again, this was a safe time. I was older. There was no fear of him taking me. But, through that journey, what God really taught me, Heather, is I don't have to have a relationship with my father to forgive him. What he did is not okay. I always thought when I was younger that forgiving means that you have to accept what the person did. That's not what it means at all. Forgiving means, God, he's yours. I'm going to lay him at your feet, and I'm going to be obedient, and I'm going to let go of that anger. And God began to soften those areas of my heart, but it took a long time. It didn't happen overnight.
And I think that's a great encouraging story for our listeners, is to know that this stuff takes time.
Yes.
Sometimes it is instant, and God does deliver us from different things that we're dealing with, and then other things we just have to work through all of those wounds, all of those heart wounds.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for that reminder. It's a good reminder.
You're welcome. And God puts the right people in your life to point him back to you. I love that verse, as iron sharpens iron, so does one man sharpen another. Beverly was my mom's iron. Beverly was saying, Kathy, go back to Jesus, and again, in my high school years when I was struggling, Bev and Rick, I mean, they pointed me back to Jesus again in my life group. It's like, all that hurt and all that turmoil, God still is a good father, and he does want good for you.
That's right. And he gives us good gifts.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe tell us about the good gifts that are in your life currently. Like you've gone on to get married and have 2 beautiful sons and have a career, and now you're doing all these other things.
Yes, I just had lunch with one of my best friends from college, and we just talked about that. It's like, God might not restore. He may not answer the prayer you want, the way you want it to be answered. He might not restore like that relationship I had with my dad, but I see restoration in my family. I can look at my husband. I have 2 boys. My kids have lived in the same house. Like their childhood's totally different than mine. And so God has shown me, Lauren, what is it in Joel where the years that the locust has eaten?
Joel 2:25 through 27. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And God's like, I am restoring it all back to you, Lauren. And he has. I mean, I get emotional because it's been a long journey, but yeah, Heather, I can, my boys are at soccer and going to school and doing regular stuff, and I have a great husband and a great career. I'm a physical therapist. But God has restored so much. And yes, like you said, I started a podcast about 6 months ago. I just really felt God putting it on my heart he's like, Lauren, it's your time. It's your time to share your story. But I was like, God, I don't know how to do this. I have dyslexia. Like, you really want me to write a book? And he's like, yes, I do want you to. So
I've heard of him doing that before for multiple people though, that maybe they have some sort of reading struggle, and God's like, no, I want to take you through this to teach you a different lesson. So that's really cool that he's doing that for you.
Yeah. Yes. And Heather, like when you're obedient, God opens all kinds of doors. So just last weekend, I just did a big reunion with the men that did my rescue.
It was fun.
It's so cool. It's the first time that I've seen 2 of the men. It's been 37 years since I've seen them. And we got to have fellowship together in North Carolina. Beverly and Rick were with me and my mom. Beverly did all the cooking, which is appropriate because they have a cookbook that they did last year. But we just prayed together and we shared stories about that mission. I got to share pictures of my family. I got to tell them, thank you for risking your life to save mine. It's so cool.
This has been so amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. I mean, these are amazing examples of healing that can take place after something really traumatic. Mm-hmm. So in the midst of all this, if you were to encourage someone to chase after Jesus, what would you tell them?
I would say it is never too late. Like I just said, I haven't seen these guys in 37 years. It's never too late to go back to Jesus. It's never too late to ask God to bring healing to whatever broken places are in your life. If it's from a divorce or from a loss or from trauma, abuse, mental, physical abuse, it is never too late. God can redeem and restore the broken places of your life. He is a big God and he wants to redeem and restore. And you can be honest with God. Like you can tell him, I don't think you're a good father, or this isn't fair, or I don't like this life, because he already knows how you feel. So just be honest and lay it at his feet and pray, even when you don't want to pray, but ask other people to pray. I've had an army of people praying over my life when I couldn't pray. And so I would really encourage you to reach out to have other people praying over your life.
That is such good advice. Well, we've thoroughly enjoyed having you on today, and we can't wait to see and hear about your book when it launches. So please let us know, and we'll let everybody know.
I will. Thank you so much. Heather, if you want to listen to any of those interviews with Dave. So I've interviewed Dave and Dawn and JD and Jim and the Lamberts. It's all on the Redeem podcast, which I didn't know I was going to be able to do that until I started. So that's something else. Just start. Just do it.
Well, thank you so much.
You're so welcome.